Welcome back, I'm Kimberly, and this is Floral Art Review. And it's early morning because I've got to get away this morning from about a better part of 5-hour drive to go and do some judging at a regional show here. But I wanted to bring you the next in the series of videos where we look at designs analysed by our AI, DesignEye, to give us an idea of how that design fits with the principles and elements of design, which is how we judge. So it's good practice for me before I head off, and also some suggestions for improving the design. This week we've got a design that is a contemporary design, and I particularly chose this one because there's been a lot of talk about what contemporary design is. So this one was done probably 9 years ago. So it was contemporary for the time. It would still be considered contemporary because of the techniques that are used in the design, for no other reason particularly these days, because contemporary means what is being done now. So this would, in some competitions, appear to be a little bit dated and still falls into the contemporary framework because of the techniques that are used within the design, but it's not as contemporary as it could be today if I did the design today. But all of that aside, there is another video that talks about the difference between contemporary and modern, and that's on the other channel that I have, that is the Flower Arranging for Competition YouTube channel. I'll put a link to that particular video in the description for this one. But let's get on to talking about this design today. As you can see, the title was Contemporary Christmas Tree. It was for an organisation that is very traditional in its approach to floral art and floral design. And so anything that was outside of the traditional ways of looking at a design would be considered by their judges as contemporary at the time. And that's fine. You know, I know that's the judging criteria for that particular competition, and it reminds us to always check what the rules are going to be used for judging, apart from the principles and elements of design, but also get a feel for the organisation and what you think that they will be looking for. And when you get to the end of this video, I will tell you what the judges gave me as feedback, even though they loved the design. It came second in the competition, and there was a particular reason for that within the framework of how they judged it. So let's look at the design first of all. It's staged on round tables, so you're always up against other designs, and it's good that I got the photo without any of the other designs that were on the table. So you have to think about, I think about something that is going to be a striking design that will stand on its own, that won't blend in with other designs that are around it. That's just an aside to the considerations. I've got tea with me this time because I know the last few videos I've lost my voice halfway through while I get worked up about talking about the designs. So if I stop, it's because I'm going to have a little sip of my tea as I go along. The design itself is sitting on a Christmas doily, so just one that you would use on the Christmas table. The container is a greenish pot that you could use for floral design, floral art, but probably more likely to be used as a gift pot that you would put a small, this time of year, a small poinsettia in to give someone. So it's glazed, it's a little bit shiny, so I knew I needed to have the contrast of the roughness or appearance of roughness in the plant material, so that your eye wouldn't always be drawn to the pot itself because of its shiny nature. So within the pot, I've got some dry foam. This was, so it tells you how many years ago it was, because I was still using foam. And so that secures in place a conical wire frame, most often I think used as a training a frame for tomato plants or something that's climbing particularly. Over that, I've put 3 wreaths of varying sizes at various points. So the base one is resting on top of the pot. The middle one was about the middle of the conical structure, and the top one is a little bit down from the top so that I could have some plant material in it and then have the star right on the top. The star itself is made with crasspedias that are glued onto toothpicks, and there's a spider web in gold wire that is within using the toothpicks and that framework as the star. Each of the layers has kangaroo paw, so a green, a yellow and a red in the kangaroo paw, an Australian native. There is some sliced banksia to cover part of the pot right at the bottom. Once again, that was just to bring the pot into the design, so the colours that I've reflected in the way I've wrapped the wreath shapes. Tea time. Sorry. So I've wrapped the wreath shapes to make sure that there's a feeling of roughness, and it's the colour that I wanted to bring through the design as well in those wreath shapes. And then to join the three wreath shapes, I've bundled some dried spear grass together, and it's all using decorative wire elements so that it had a little bit of a sparkle and shine. And I'm laughing at that because I'll tell you now that the judge's comment afterwards was that there wasn't enough Christmassy stuff in it. It wasn't sparkly enough. She wanted to see some tinsel in it as well. And I thought that for me, that would detract from the contemporary nature of the design. So I'd have to think about perhaps what I should have done is, when bundling that spear grass together, is to use something more obviously sparkly in the wire rather than the tinsel, because I think the tinsel would take away from all of the plant material too much to use it. I could have used tinsel as the wrapping around the wreath base, and that would have given a subtleness and a Christmassy feel to it without it being too overpowering. All that aside, we won't rush ahead and think what I should have done, could have done, would have done if I had done it again. Let's have a look at what the DesignEye analysis is and what it suggests as improvements for the design. So an overall comment, first of all, this piece creatively interprets the traditional Christmas tree through a modern structural and botanical lens, using a tiered construction and plant material in an innovative way. It successfully blends form and festivity with a few refinements could express the theme even more strongly. So it can see that there is room for improvement, as I can now looking back on it, and this is part of the value of reviewing our designs and reviewing them this way for you, is that it really does help me to reassess my work and to have a starting point where I can look at that, what has been suggested in this analysis, and then think about what I would do in terms of my own journey that I've had since I did this design last. Let's look now at the principles and elements of design. Balance, first of all. The design is visually balanced despite its height and tiered format. The three levels provide structural stability and visual progression. There is a slight asymmetry in the mid-level due to the curved bare grass, which adds interest but needs careful management to avoid looking unbalanced. Now, this is something that I didn't notice in the design itself when I did it, and I certainly didn't notice it this time around. I know that there needs to be some refinement in that central area, but my feeling is that they're not evenly spaced enough, the three levels, and I would be looking at changing the levels so that they're a little bit more evenly spaced between the wreaths, so that it reinforced that conical Christmas tree shape. But once again, the first thing that it tells us makes me start to think about what I should have done, what I could have done. Let's keep moving. Proportion and scale. Good scale between the levels. Each layer tapers slightly to echo the tree form. The proportion between the botanical material and the framework is mostly effective. The base container appears a bit visually light in comparison to the full display. It could benefit from visual weight or embellishment, like a ribbon or base treatment to ground the design. So my thinking about putting the banksia slices onto the outside of that pot was right, but what I needed to do was make it, incorporate it more into the design. So what it's saying is that the design itself looks great from the wreaths up, but the bottom part of it is not really reflecting the strength of the top part. So a different container, a container that is better incorporated into the design. And I think the doily has to go. There has to be something a bit stronger that the whole design is sitting on. You know, maybe that it is that it lifts it more off the table. So something that I'm thinking as I'm talking to you. I go back to the Banksia slices just because I like them as a very solid basing, but something that is perhaps more Christmassy. You know, maybe that's where I could have incorporated some Christmas baubles. So I had a plate with Christmas baubles on it and had the design coming out of that collection of baubles at the bottom. But I'd have to be careful to incorporate them into the rest of the design and not have them be the hero of the design. So some food for thought in that particular one. But in terms of proportion and scale, it looks right. Once again, I'll go back to the spacing between the wreaths. I think that there's room for improvement in that. Rhythm and movement. The use of spiralling bear grass, or spear grass as we call it, and loops creates dynamic movement around the form, which is what I wanted. I wanted it to be the replacement for this tinsel, but also to make it a bit more exciting than just the static Christmas tree that sits in the corner with the lights flashing. The vertical lift is clearly established, but rhythm could be enhanced by introducing more visual stepping between the tiers, perhaps through colour gradation or light to dark tonal shifts. That's an interesting assessment and analysis because I hadn't thought about that. I know that my thinking at the time was that I would have each layer have the same combination of the three types of kangaroo paw. And I think that would make it a much stronger design to have that colour gradation through the design. But also here it's starting to talk about the difference between those levels. And visually, I think that it needs to have a bit more space between the bottom one and the middle one. The looping of the bear grass, I talked right at the beginning about making it a little bit more obvious and making it a little bit more structured. And I think that would help the design. I like that it gives the movement, but to me it's a bit lopsided. It's not as, because the shape is so very structurally formal, the movement needs to be a formal, if you can call it that, movement in the design as well. So dominance, the structural form of the tree is dominant and it clearly leads the eye upward. However, the repetition of similar textures and colours, the green and the burgundy, across all layers reduces hierarchy. So this would come into the suggestion in the previous element is about using the colours to keep your eye moving in the design as well as the dominance of textures and colours. The top tier could use more contrast or a focal accent to declare it as the star of the tree. So the star I've made itself out of the craspedia is being lost by the amount of material in that top layer. So once again, I'd have to think about not just the colour and not just the placement, but having that, you know, perhaps what I needed to do, tea time again, was to have, because the red is going to be the most solid of the colours, have the red in the base wreath, have the green in the middle wreath, then have the yellow at the top, because that's going to, with its lightness, we're going to travel up that way. But the lightness is going to enhance the star and make us notice the star a little bit more than we do with it being surrounded by all those different colours. Unity and harmony. There's a strong unity through repetition of materials and form. The use of organic textures works beautifully. The harmony of colour is effective, but a little more variation could enrich visual interest. And so we've talked a little bit about that, and I think we've probably covered all the things that I need to highlight for you here in this particular analysis. It's about, yes, all of those colours are Christmas colours, but to make this a really strong design in terms of a number of areas of assessment, I sort of thought a little bit more about the colour placement and that gradation of colours through the design. Line now. The primary vertical line is very clear and effective. Secondary lines, the spirals and the loop grasses, often soften the rigidity and introduce flow. though some are slightly uneven and could benefit from more controlled placement. So I think really we've talked about that. We've talked about enhancing that movement and that line by having it a little bit more structured than it is now. Colour, again, we've talked a little bit about already. The red, green and golden tones evoke Christmas in a modern way. The colours are a little muted, adding more deliberate colour contrasts or shine, perhaps metallic touches of brighter florals, could enhance the festive appeal. Now, I chose the kangaroo paw particularly because, number one, it's out and in full bloom at that particular time of year in this country, but also because I wanted to use a plant material that was more contemporary in terms of floral art. So it's not just about the overall design being contemporary, but it's contemporary plant material that is contemporary in its use, so being used more often today than it was in the past. So not traditional to use kangaroo paw in designs, but certainly more modern and more contemporary in its use these days. The colours, once again, had we had that gradation, would appear less muted because there would be solid blocks of a single colour. So all good ideas in that colour analysis. Texture. Excellent textural interest. Kangaroo paw twine, billy buttons and beargrass all contribute to a rich sensory experience. Consider contrast with the smoother reflective material, baubles or metallic ribbon, to add a sleek contemporary element. And as I'm reading that, what I'm thinking is that I could have used a mirror as the base. Where I've got the doily at the moment, if I'd used a mirror, even if it was a muted metallic mirroring surface, even if it was a reflective red surface or a shade of red, something else that was in the design already, that would add a whole different feel to this particular design. Makes it contemporary because using mirrors is a contemporary technique in the design. Gives it that basing, means that the design itself would be semi-reflected, and so it gives us another layer of the design within the design itself. So certainly something that I would consider, and as I mentioned, maybe the balls, but I probably wouldn't use the balls because I don't want them to overwhelm. I don't want it to be obviously in your face, this is a Christmas tree. I want it to be something that the judges say, oh, this is a Christmas tree, rather than beat them around the head with the design. Space. Effective use of open space between the tiers allows air and lightness, avoiding visual heaviness. Negative space between the grass spirals adds to the form, though these could be slightly more evenly distributed. So we've talked about that as well. I need to work on the space in this design and get it a little bit more organised and even in terms of my interpretation of and using the space within the design to make the design more than the sum of its parts. The form. Strong and imaginative cone-shaped form replicates a tree silhouette while showcasing artistic flair. A great example of transforming a familiar form into something modern. So this is an interesting reflection and analysis of the design, because uppermost in my mind obviously was the Christmas tree is this shape. This is how we think of a Christmas tree, whether it's done in a silhouette or as an obvious tree element, and to think about how I could maintain that shape but use things that wouldn't normally be used. And that's why I chose the wreath shapes, because that's not normally how we would think about a Christmas tree. We would think about it as much more linear placements and designs. And the idea of those different forms, so the rounded form of the wreath shapes, the triangular form of the structure itself, the different shape that the kangaroo paw flower gives you, all need to be brought together, and that's what the beargrass is for, not just the movement, but to bring those forms together into something that was a whole. So it's a dangerous and challenging way to do a design, but I've always been on the edge of design challenge anyway, and so I can see why I did it and what I need to do to polish it off and make it a bit more refined. Some suggestions now. Enhance the focal point at the top, which we talked about. Consider a more defined star or vertical accent to declare the peak. Now I think if I changed the colour gradation around, that would happen, that I would get that um, building of momentum up to the top and have the yellow golden colour of the kangaroo paw in that top wreath only, and then the star. It would have been that whole section would have been the focal point at the top. Strengthen the base, which we've talked about. The base could be visually weighted with a more bold colour or textural interest. A red container, a metallic collar, or wrapped base could elevate the overall finish. So I didn't think about a wrapped base. I suppose I could have used some Christmas wrapping paper around the pot itself and had it a little bit open. You know, mine's visualising it and can't quite get the words out to give you the picture of what I'm thinking about. But we did talk about strengthening the base and making it more part of the design than just where it is placed on the bench itself, on the show bench. Introduce colour or shine variation. A few small ornaments or reflective materials, perhaps sparingly, would enhance the Christmas feel without overpowering the botanical theme. So this is the balance that you have to have between introducing embellishments, things that are not plant material, and the things that are plant material. And as I'm saying it, I'm hesitating because I'm thinking about a design I did very much more recently, where I made the baubles out of plant material. And perhaps I could have thought about doing that. So I had the baubles, so you styrofoam ball, cover it with some leaf or some other dried plant material or seed pods or whatever, and then wrap that in just randomly in some metallic wire to give it the shine. Gives you the bauble shape. It's a contemporary take on a Christmas bauble, and it introduces the shine and the variation, the colour variation that is being suggested here. Refine the grass placement. Reshape some of the grass spirals to create more rhythm and ensure symmetrical energy. Their direction and art could better echo the tier levels. So we've talked about that all the way through, and I think it's quite clear that I need, I need to think about that, the placement of that grass. It gives us wonderful movement and rhythm in the design, and it does need, as it says, it just needs refinement. So wrapping it in the decorative wire or the bullion wire gives it a subtle bit of shine, but also gives me more opportunity to bend it to my will so that I can have it a little bit more structured in its placement. Still the wild movement, but within the design space itself. So our overall thoughts, our final thoughts, this is a clever, well-constructed and imaginative interpretation of a Christmas tree using botanical artistry to explore a well-known form. It blends structure with organic materials thoughtfully, and a few enhancements in contrast, base treatment and apex definition would lift it from strong to outstanding. And I hope that as we've gone through, you can see that that's the case, and that if I had just made tiny changes, that it would have transformed this design into something that was very much stronger in its interpretation than the one that was presented. As I said earlier, it got a second place. The judge wanted a bit more glitter or bling, Christmassy bling in it, and that's, judge's decision is final. But I can see now, looking at this review and having help from AI, DesignEye, that these are the things that, just slight changes here and there. And that's the beauty of you submitting an image of a design of yours and getting that feedback, is that it triggers the thinking process for you. So it makes it much more of a self-education journey. You've got some very definite ideas and analysis based on the principles and elements of design, which is what we are judged on. And it gives you a chance to think about how you would do it slightly differently, just a change here and there. So I do encourage you to submit some of your designs and have them assessed. They come back within about 24 hours. A human judge will look at it as well and make sure that it makes sense to you. So you saw in this one, it talked about bear grass because that's how it identifies it. We call it something different here. We don't stress too much about the pure botanical names of the plant material, just so long as you understand that it's talking about this plant material in your design, that's enough. But the basis of the analysis is about giving you a starting point to think about your designs, to think about developing your designs. There we have it for our contemporary Christmas tree. Join us next time. I'm Kim Bailey and this is Floral Art Review.